Yo, in this video, I'm going to be talking about healthy debt in your property portfolio and how you can leverage that debt to help enhance your investment returns. Because sometimes money just makes more money. I don't hear enough investors or developers talking about leverage returns, so I thought I'd make this video to really make it clear, because it's the exact financial mechanism that creates so many default property millionaires. So let's compare the difference between a like-for-like strategy, one where you leverage the property on the back end, meaning you get a mortgage, and another one where you just park your cash, meaning it's an unencumbered asset. For this example, we're going to assume that you have £200,000 cash to invest into a 5-bed HMO. Then we're going to directly compare the capital growth returns and the income returns using basic round numbers to make life easier. Scenario 1 is the cash strategy, which is pretty straightforward. You just fund the whole thing in cash, meaning your capex for the deal is £200,000. But of course, you have uplifted the property value to £230,000 because that's the nature of development. If you do a good job, you'll uplift the value, but you won't realise that £30,000 gain until you exit the project far into the future. So for now, it's just going to be held as an asset on your balance sheet. So that's £200,000 capex, £230,000 GDV, so an on-paper profit of £30,000. And for your income, let's assume £500 rent per room, or £2,500 for the whole property each month. Say 30% goes to management and utilities, that's your OPEX. And that's going to leave you with £1,750 net every single month, or £21,000 per year. Now, when you finish the project, we're assuming that you're not going to use any financial gearing. So you're going to park all of this money in there. You're sure you're going to be making a nice, safe return with no gearing, but it means that you don't have the opportunity to pull out capital and buy another property. So let's just say you hold this asset for 15 years. So 15 years later, let's assume the property value has doubled. So now it's worth £460,000. So you've made a profit of £260,000 in the equity value, which you could realise if you sold the property. Annualised, £260,000 over 15 years is £17,000 a year profit for just sitting on the asset. Of course, that £17,000 a year is not adjusted for inflation, so it's simply a nominal rate of return, not a real rate of return, because to calculate that would make this video far too honest about the diabolical state of our global fiat system printing its way into oblivion. So for now, just buy property or buy Bitcoin. However, we will look at the income adjusted to inflation, because year on year, rents go up. And over the past few years, rents have gone up at an astonishing rate. But for this, we're just going to assume 4% year on year from that initial £21,000, meaning at the end of 15 years, you're going to be making £37,000 a year net profit from that one property. So in summary, you started with £200,000, you bought one 5-bed HMO, and over 15 years, you made £260,000 equity profit, and you're left with £37,000 net income at the end of the term, which is a great way to hedge against inflation and to store your wealth into the long term. But you're not using inflation to your advantage. So, scenario 2. So this is the gearing strategy. As for the numbers, we're going to copy and paste from the first scenario just to keep it easy, as if the investment merits are exactly the same. This doesn't take into account a multitude of factors, so don't scrutinise this too harshly. We're only really focused on the gearing aspect. So you're going to buy a property, refurbish the whole thing and do it for £200,000. You're then going to get an uplift in the valuation, the same as the first scenario, which leaves you with £230,000 GDV. The difference now is you're going to gear that asset to realise some of that uplift and pull out a majority of your capital. So you're going to gear it to 75% loan to value. Pretty common, you can get that from most lenders, which means you're going to pull out £172,500 cash to go and buy another property. You're then going to be left with 25% of the asset value, so you've got £57,500 in equity value. You're also going to leave in about £27,500 cash, because the 75% mortgage you're getting is lower than the total capex, so that difference there is left in as £27,500. But of course, that's reflected in your equity value. Now, the lender's not going to give you money for free, so there's a cost to carrying that debt. We're going to assume that you're getting an interest-only mortgage, but that will mean you have to make financial payments each month, which comes off of your income. Interest rates are somewhat of a moving target, so let's just assume that all in all, it's going to cost you £750 a month to service that debt. If we go back to scenario 1, you were left with £1,750 net income every single month after operational expenses. Now you also have to take off your mortgage expenses, which will leave you with £1,000 net income each month, or £12,000 every single year. Now, because you're leaving £27,500 in each deal, and you've only got £200,000 to play with initially, it means that's only going to take you so far. So let's assume over a 3-year period, you amass a portfolio of 4 HMO properties, and you're parking in that capital each time. Because your original cash pot of £200,000 is going to park money into each project, you're going to use short-term bridging or development finance to help fund the scheme. So we've just assumed that all of that's happened, and over 3 years, you've amassed 4 HMOs. And this is what that looks like. You'll have £920,000 gross asset value across the 4 properties, a £690,000 debt position, £230,000 net equity, which by the way is already higher than your original £200,000. You're going to park in £110,000 of your original £200,000, and you're going to be generating £48,000 net income every single year. Because you're only parking in £110,000 and you're gearing it each time, you're also going to pull out £90,000 capital to go back in your pocket. So 15 years later, what does your portfolio look like? And of course, over this period, because you're gearing, you could have bought a load more properties as well, or used the subsequent income stream to help fund more purchases. But let's just say you didn't do that, and that you didn't increase the debt position. You kept that debt position at the same ratio the whole way through 15 years. And because it took you 3 years initially to acquire the properties, we're only going to calculate our income numbers over a 12-year period to be conservative. But we will assume that the asset value's doubled, just so this video doesn't take so long. So now you've got a £1.8 million portfolio, which is nuts because you started with 200k, but your debt position stays at 690,000 because the bank doesn't own equity in your property. They don't benefit from the uplift. It's purely a fixed loan which gets eroded by inflation. So thank you to the big money printer, because over time what's happening is your net equity position is growing as a consequence of inflation. And sure, your overheads are also rising in line with inflation, but those costs are getting passed on to your tenants. So therefore your rents are rising, but your net equity is just growing. This is why healthy debt is so powerful. It's a great hedge against inflation, which really is the true overhead to our whole society. And this is one of the core reasons why there's a huge, ever-expanding wealth gap in our society, because if you own assets, you can ride inflation like a wave. And if you don't, you drown underneath it with ever-rising costs, like these tenants that are paying higher rents year on year. So back to the merits. Now you're at £1.15 million net equity, and you've only left in £110,000, meaning you've made a profit of £1 million over a 15-year period. Annualized, that's £66,000 profit every single year for doing nothing but holding the asset. And then you're making £77,000 net income every year on top. And really, this is how most default millionaires are made. Let's move on to the next bit, where we'll compare the 2 scenarios side by side. So you started with the same £200,000 pot, but in scenario 1, you made £260,000 net equity. You've got £37,000 net income at the end of the 15 years, and you've got 0% debt, which is considered obviously very safe. So some people prefer this strategy. We have clients who prefer this strategy because you're not taking on any risk of debt or servicing that debt, which is a preference. Some people prefer to do it that way. But what are you missing out on? Because in scenario 2, you've made £1,040,000 net equity, 4 times that amount, £77,000 net income per year. And although you did start at a higher gearing of 75% debt, over time, because of inflation and capital appreciation, you've eroded that debt down to 37.5%. And this is why we take out interest-only mortgages. And sure, in a bad market, you may not think it's the best thing to do, but that's why you fixed your interest rates. Because over time, I could pay down that capital in the property, but why? I'd rather benefit from the income and let inflation do the work for me, and over half my debt position on the property just by waiting. So how much more money have you made by leveraging your returns? The difference between scenario 2 and scenario 1 is £780,000. That's your opportunity cost for not taking on healthy debt. And you're making more than £40,000 per annum because you've got more properties in your portfolio. And you've only left £110,000 in, you got £90,000 back. So you've kind of done it on half the amount of capital initially as well. And that's it. That's a high-level overview on how you can leverage debt to help enhance your portfolio and ultimately grow your wealth. What we haven't done is spoken about debt going wrong. So it is possible that you can over-leverage your portfolio, and in the event of higher interest rates, you then may not be able to afford the interest, or if property prices come down, the bank might call in the loan and you're there having to repay hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds. So make sure you know your numbers and always stress test your property and find its healthy sweet spot of debt. Now, if you do this well, then you can amass fortunes through leverage returns, compounding your wealth over time. And of course, a special thanks to the government's money printer, which as they keep pumping liquidity into the economy, it's just eroding our debt position. And for anyone thinking that sounds too good to be true, why would the government be so nice to us? Well, that's just not the case. The government has its own debt itself, and it also has to pay interest for it. So they are quite literally stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they have to balance the scales of inflation and interest rates. If rates go too high from the central bank, then the government itself could default on its own debt obligations. So if the government or the Bank of England raise rates in an attempt to curb inflation, they also put the government at risk of defaulting on their own loans. Because if inflation's running rampant, then they have to raise rates to try and bring it back down. Because if they don't tame inflation, then we can run into hyperinflation, where our currency just gets more and more debased, which has happened thousands of times throughout societies around the world. Their perfect balance is to allow inflation to run at a gradual pace over many years, eroding their own debt obligations and, of course, the ones in our properties. But they can't let inflation go too far, falling into hyperinflation. As of the last 3 years, it's pretty safe to say the government's done a piss-poor job of this, but it's not actually their fault. It comes down to our fiat-backed system, which is a credit system, and over time, it's designed to debase the currency, meaning the pound has an ever-diminishing purchasing power, but things like assets or scarce commodities rise in perceived value. So if you're not wise to this economic mechanism that gets used around the world, then you won't benefit from leverage returns yourself, because if you hold assets in this way and you manage a healthy amount of debt, then you can utilize literally the government and the fiat policy of just eroding debt by inflation. Wait, and the debt will go down. So why not utilize your purchasing power and your cash, split them into different pies, and leverage your returns? But be careful of your debt obligations. And that's it for this video. So thank you for watching, and do fire away questions in the comments, because I am going to make a Q&A video soon where we'll put together all the questions and I'll come up with as many answers as I possibly can. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment, like it, subscribe. Peace. That are paying higher rents year on year. That's the one, mate.